I'm better than a 20-year-old for health. Honestly, wow. To get those kinds of results, Sinclair relies on a master theme that we'll be weaving throughout this whole explainer, and it's this concept of controlled adversity. As you'll see, slowing down the aging process isn't about pampering the body. No, it's actually about appropriately stressing the body so it naturally builds up its own powerful, youthful defenses. To decode his exact protocol, we're looking at 5 key pillars today: the 10-minute exercise rule, the power of fasting, the stress plant diet, his big 3 supplements, and finally, the 5 foods he avoids. By the end of this, you'll have a clear roadmap of how these elements combine to combat aging.
All right, let's kick things off with Pillar 1, the 10-minute exercise rule.
When it comes to physical activity, Dr. Sinclair follows a surprisingly simple, really time-efficient rule. He aims to exercise just 3 times a week. But here's the kicker. It's all about intensity. You've got to push yourself until you actually lose your breath, literally to the point where you couldn't easily carry on a conversation. So why does that loss of breath matter so much? Well, reaching that breathless or hypoxic, low oxygen state for just 10 minutes applies a massive dose of that positive stress we were just talking about. In response to that, your body rushes to build muscle, improve blood flow, and release anti-aging chemicals. The result, hitting this state consistently lowers your overall disease rate by an astonishing 30%. That is huge.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, the power of fasting.
We hear a ton about different diets, but Sinclair's research actually shows that when you eat is just as vital as what you eat. Our modern habit of constantly grazing, 3 heavy meals a day plus endless snacking, is actually keeping our bodies constantly working, and that accelerates the aging process. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why fasting works at a genetic level instead. Meet your sirtuins. These are a set of longevity genes hardwired right into your DNA that act like a defense force against aging and disease. But here's the catch with sirtuins. They are only activated when the body's energy levels, meaning your circulating sugar and protein, are low. So if you're constantly eating, these defensive genes, they just stay asleep. So how do we actually wake them up? Well, take a look at Sinclair's typical daily timeline. He implements a 16 to 20-hour fasting window. In the morning, it's all about hydration for him: coffee, matcha tea, hot water. He typically pushes his first actual meal to a late lunch, or he just skips it entirely, culminating in one healthy vegan dinner in the evening. And he has this great, highly relatable tip for getting through those rough mornings. Staying hyperhydrated with hot liquids or just eating a tiny handful of nuts will rapidly kill off those annoying hunger pangs.
And by pushing that fasting window past the 16-hour mark, you unlock this remarkable biological function called autophagy. Think of autophagy as a deep cellular cleanse. Because the body isn't burdened with digesting a bunch of new food, it starts scanning your cells, finding old, damaged proteins and recycling them. It's basically taking out the biological trash. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. I could never do that. I'd be way too hungry. But Sinclair points out something absolutely vital here. If you stick to this routine for just 2 to 3 weeks, your liver naturally adopts through a process called gluconeogenesis. Basically, your liver realizes, hey, no food is coming in this morning, so it just starts generating its own steady drip of glucose. Once that kicks in, it's a game changer. The brain fog lifts, your energy stabilizes, and that feeling of overwhelming hunger, it effectively vanishes. Which brings us to Pillar 3, the stress plant diet.
So when Sinclair finally does break his fast, he eats an almost entirely plant-based diet. But he doesn't just eat any vegetables. He focuses specifically on plants that have had to survive adversity. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this fascinating concept called xenohormesis. It's a biological hypothesis explaining how the stress a plant experiences is directly transferred to us. Think about it. When organic plants are grown out in a field without pesticides, they have to fight off the elements and insects all by themselves. To survive, they produce these defensive chemicals called polyphenols. And when we eat those stressed plants, we ingest those exact same polyphenols, which then activate our own cellular stress responses and help extend our lifespan. Pretty cool, right? So what does a stressed plant diet actually look like in the real world? Well, his daily staples include matcha green tea, which is just packed with anti-inflammatory properties, dark leafy greens like spinach for iron, and olive oil, which is loaded with oleic acid, and that's another big sirtuin activator. The basic rule of thumb here is color. You want to go for bright red, purple, and dark green veggies. But I really want to add some important nuance here. Sinclair isn't a robot. He openly admits that sometimes, he's in a beautiful place on vacation and decides to just enjoy a great breakfast. This protocol doesn't have to be completely draconian to actually be effective. Let's shift gears now to Pillar 4, the big three supplements.
For a long time, the dominant theory out there was that taking loads of antioxidants would somehow cure aging. But science has largely moved on from that, as antioxidants ultimately failed to significantly extend lifespan in lab models. The really cutting-edge science is now focused on entirely different biological pathways. But before we list them, we definitely need to look at this very important disclaimer. As a PhD researcher and a Harvard geneticist, Dr. Sinclair is incredibly strict about maintaining his impartiality. He's merely sharing his personal, daily routine based on his own lab work. He does not profit from, sell, or endorse any specific supplement brands whatsoever.
So keeping that in mind, let's break down his daily stack. First up is resveratrol, which is derived from red wine grapes. He sprinkles about a gram of this into a bit of his morning yogurt to help turn on those longevity pathways we talked about. Second is metformin. Interestingly, this is actually a really common, very safe diabetics drug that's shown massive potential in safely controlling blood sugar and protecting against cardiovascular disease, even in non-diabetics. And third is a vitamin B3 derivative known as NMN.
Let's move to NMN and see how this builds upon our earlier concepts. Why NMN specifically? Well, because taking NMN directly doubles your body's levels of something called NAD. Think back to those sirtuin defense genes we were talking about earlier. NAD is the essential fuel those genes actually need to operate. As we age, our natural NAD levels just plummet. And without the NAD provided by an NMN supplement, your sirtuin defense genes simply cannot function, literally no matter how well you eat.
All right, now we arrive at the climax of our explainer, Pillar 5, the 5 foods to avoid. Because as transformative as his additions are, what Dr. Sinclair actively removes from his diet is just as impactful on his biological age. Here is the list of exactly what he cut out. First, sugar and fructose. High blood sugar literally caramelizes the proteins in your body and serves as the absolute favorite fuel source for cancer cells. Second, bread and heavy carbs. Eating bread causes a massive sugar spike followed by a sharp insulin crash, which leads to that terrible hypoglycemia and afternoon brain fog. Third and fourth, meat and dairy. By cutting these out, he drastically lowered his animal protein intake. This reduction actually kicks a specific longevity pathway called mTOR into high gear, making the body fight aging way more aggressively. And finally, he cut out daily alcohol, noting that the latest research strongly links it to accelerated aging. So the crucial point is really captured when we contrast these two lifestyles side by side. The standard modern diet keeps us in a state of constant digestion, just riding a roller coaster of sugar spikes and heavily burdened by meat and dairy. The Sinclair protocol, on the other hand, is like a completely different operating system. Time-restricted fasting, polyphenol-rich stress plants, tightly controlled blood sugar, and low animal protein. But remember, he does stay relatable. He'll occasionally sub in monk fruit or stevia to satisfy a sweet tooth, and he even admits to stealing a scoop of ice cream every now and then. It's really about consistency over the long haul, not absolute perfection. As we wrap things up, I want to leave you with this question directly addressing the core of today's explainer. Which of these 5 pillars will you start today? We've seen the science, and the ultimate takeaway here is immensely empowering. Aging is not a fixed one-way street. It's a highly malleable process. By applying just a little controlled adversity, whether that's 10 minutes of breathless exercise, skipping breakfast, or maybe adding some vibrant stress plans to your plate, you have the power to step in and literally rewrite your own body's software. Start small, pick one pillar, and just see how your biology responds. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep learning.